Hey, do you know anything about the medieval ages and the different types of torture and punishment?
Yeah, I know a few things, but I don't know much.
Hey, I could use any information I can find.
Well, I know the medieval periods were violent and bloodthirsty. The laws did not have any fixed rules for punishment and torture of prisoners and how badly they could be punished.
That is harsh, but why?
They seen it as totally legitimate for justice to get confessions.
How and why were their punishments determined?
Different types of torture and punishment were used depending on the victim's crime and social status.
What was torture defined as then, or is it the same as today?
Torture is the deliberate, systematic, cruel and wanton infliction of physical or mental suffering by one or more torturers in an attempt to force another person to yield information. Torture chambers were located in the lower parts of castles. The entrances to many torture chambers were accessed through winding passages which served to muffle the agonizing cries of torture victims from the normal inhabitants of the castle. Torture chambers and dungeons were often very small, some measured only 11 feet long by 7 feet wide, in which from 10 to 20 prisoners were often incarcerated at the same time.
Was torture abolished in any country?
Torture was on several occasions condemned by the Church. As early as 866, we find, from Pope Nicholas V's letter to the Bulgarians, that their custom of torturing the accused was considered contrary to divine as well as to human law. Medieval torture was a freely accepted form of punishment and was only abolished in England in 1640.
Did a lot of people lose blood and die from torture?
No tortural methods were allowed in an inquisition that resulted in bloodshed, mutilation, or death. A common form of torture was hanging the accused by the wrists, hoisted above ground, and then having weights hung from their ankles. This tortural method was known as the Judas cradle, and a similar method was called the straw powder. The rules were strict and bloodshed extended to the preferred execution method of men or women who were proclaimed as heretics by the Inquisition was therefore being burned to death.
Was there any people from history who were famous and were tortured?
Many famous medieval people were accused of heresy and subject to an inquisition. On Friday the 13th, in October 1307, Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and 60 of his senior knights were arrested in Paris. Joan of Arc was also subjected to a medieval inquisition and subsequently burnt at the stake.
What were different devices of torture?
Forms of torture are the Spanish boot, brand and irons, Judas cradle, straw powder, brodequin, the collar, the rack, thumb screws, the wheel, foot press, foot screw, heretic's fork, water torture, brank, the collar, drunkard's cloak, the maiden, pillory, the scavenger's daughter, scold's bridle, stocks, dukenstools.
What were other types of torture that did not use a device?
Ripping out teeth or nails, beating, blinding and boiling, flagellation, whipping and beating, flaying, roasting, genital mutilation, limb/finger removal, starvation, tongue removal, bone breaking, branding and burning, castration, choking, cutting, disfigurement, dislocation, and drowning.
I have these questions, can you answer them?